Welcome back to Community Connections for another thought about the Lord's Supper. If you had lived in the Roman Empire in the first century, you might have been accused as a Christian of cannibalism, because it was reported that when Christians met together, that they ate a man's flesh and drank his blood. What that would have done if I had converted to Christianity and my neighbor had questions about what it is that we did when we met together, it would have actually given me an opportunity to talk about the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper really points right to the central teachings of Christianity. That Christ died for our sins and that He's raised again to give us victory over death. Today I don't know that we would be accused of being cannibals. But I do think the Lord's Supper still gives us an opportunity to explain to people the central parts of Christian teaching. I also think that the Lord's Supper is also evidence for the fact that Christ's claims are true, that He is indeed the Son of God. Because there are things about the Lord's Supper that are just too perfect for it to be something that was coincidence. So today let me share with you another connection with the Lord's Supper. Scripture tells us that Christ's blood is able to cleanse us of our sins. Reading from Hebrews chapter 9 verse 14. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered Himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so it may serve the living God. Now those cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, those acts that lead to death is sinful acts or sin. So we're told in this verse here that Christ's blood cleanses us from sin. What's interesting is that in the Old Testament practices, the way they would try to cleanse one another from their sins was by animal sacrifice. And animal sacrifice, at least the way that I picture it, I picture it would have been pretty messy. Animals were sacrificed, the blood was taken, it would be sprinkled on their clothing, it would be sprinkled on the altar, it was sprinkled on the Ark of the Covenant, on the mercy seat. I would feel like after I had experienced that, I probably needed to go home and take a shower as opposed to actually feeling cleansed. And yet we give this imagery in the Bible that blood somehow cleanses and not stains or causes a mess. How does that happen? Well, today we know medically what blood does. My blood in my body runs to my heart where it picks up, the red blood cells pick up oxygen, which they take to every other cell in my body. And from there, they drop off the oxygen and pick up urea, uric acid, and other toxins, which are then taken to the kidneys where the blood is cleaned. So it's true, in a medical sense, that our blood does clean our bodies of toxins within the cells. In fact, if you were to, put a tourniquet around your arm and you begin to feel that tingling in your arm, that's because you're cutting off that life support system of the blood being able to cleanse the toxins out of your cells. Well, it's interesting to me that at the Lord's Supper, Jesus doesn't take the blood and sprinkle it on His disciples again. He takes the blood, He takes the cup and says, "This is the new covenant in my blood, drink all of it." And that imagery again suggests that it's Christ's blood inside of us that symbolically cleanses us from our sin. And again, that's interesting because Christ in the first century, people in the first century didn't understand how blood worked, but Christ uses an imagery of the Lord's Supper that exactly identifies with what blood does in our body. It actually cleanses us from the toxins and wastes in our body, just as Christ's blood in us can cleanse us from sin. So again, I just find the Lord's Supper an amazing analogy of what Christ has done for us. It brings us right to the central story of His death and His resurrection. And it also, I think, identifies the fact that He is who He claims to be. He's God. He understands how blood works. And He uses that imagery in the Lord's Supper to help us understand how our sinful lives can be cleaned and from sin. So that's another Community Connection, and I'll see you next time.